Hi, I'm Bill Antholis, Director and CEO of UVA's Miller Center, the nation's leading research center on the American presidency. Our faculty and fellows, drawn from across UVA and from presidential administrations of both parties, host more than 50 events each year featuring some of America's leading thinkers and doers. When the pandemic raged, we pivoted to a webinar series that reached thousands across the country and around the world. All of this was possible at no charge to the public because of your generous support. I hope you'll tune into our events again in the coming months, either virtually or in person, and visit millercenter.org for resources that go way beyond sound bites and clickbait. History is talking. The Miller Center's listening. And thank you for joining us today. It's Bill Antholis again. We're excited to have you with us to discuss the post-presidency of former President George Herbert Walker Bush with his guiding hand, Jean Becker. Post-presidencies are particularly meaningful for us here at UVA. Of course, our university was founded by the third president during his post-presidency and guided by the fourth president, James Madison, after President Jefferson died. We also have been blessed to partner with a range of presidential libraries, policy centers, and foundations, which of course are central to many post-presidencies. We've had the privilege and pleasure to work with many of them. The names are familiar to you all: Hoover, Kennedy, Johnson, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Obama, and of course, both Bush Library Foundations. Our very vibrant relationship with the Bush 41 Library has been particularly meaningful to us. And the two big reasons for that are our two guests today. Jean Becker's book, The Man I Knew, The Amazing Story of George H.W. Bush's Post-Presidency, memorializes the late President Bush's life, starting in an atypical spot for a U.S. president, several years after he left the highest office in the country. Jean expertly and heartfully recounts how President Bush was able to rebuild his life with pride, courage, and joy in the wake of his re-election loss in 1992. With the personal touch of someone who both knew and cared deeply for the late president, Jean charts the path from the catastrophically low approval rating of 34% in the 1992 election to becoming a beloved American hero by the time of President Bush's death in 2018. In addition to authoring The Man I Knew, Jean worked with Barbara Bush to publish Pearls of Wisdom, a definitive collection of the First Lady's famous advice, and another heartwarming book. Jean worked alongside President Bush for nearly 25 years, from 1994 until the president's death in 2018. This was after having served as Deputy Press Secretary to First Lady Barbara Bush from 1989 to 1992, and as a journalist for 10 years. Thank you, Jean, for your service and for being with us today and giving us such a beautiful portrait of the late president's life. Jean is actually here with us today in Charlottesville. It's not her first time. She participated in the Presidential Ideas Festival in 2019. She was also an essential player in our PBS documentary Statecraft, the Bush 41 team, about the administration's efforts to bring a peaceful end to the Cold War. Jean's assistance in pulling the troops back together again to be interviewed was instrumental in making that project happen. And here to guide us in conversation with Jean is our Miller Center Senior Fellow, Mary Kate Cary, who also served in the George H.W. Bush White House from 1989 to 92 in her role as White House speechwriter. Mary Kate has written a handful of books about president's life and career and was senior writer for communications in the 1988 Bush Quail campaign and is chair of the advisory board of the George and Barbara Bush Foundation. So thank you all for being with us here today. Thanks to our team here that helps produce these webinars. Mary Kate, as always, it's great to see you, not just in Zoom, but to see you in person today. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Bill. It was delightful to see you in person today, too. I don't have to put quote marks around C like you do these days. We actually did see each other in person. And thank you for bringing us together today. It's a joy to be here with one of my best friends in life and someone who at least as much, if not more, admires George Bush as much as I do. So it's when do you ever get to sit with your best friend and talk about someone that you both look up to tremendously. So let's get started. New York Times bestselling author Jean Becker, and you see the cover of the book there behind her on the bookcase. And let's just start sort of big picture, Jean. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, Mary Kate, before I answer that question, I'm just thrilled to be here at the Miller Center at the great University of Virginia. It's such an honor. My apologies to whoever's office I'm in. They wouldn't let Mary Kate and I sit together in the same room because I think they were afraid we would start gossiping. But I did a little redecorating. Yes, President Bush's book is over this shoulder and a picture of him.
Yep.
On a train trip, just a little redecorating.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's wonderful to be here. And I do want to say to this great UVA audience, one of the stories I was going to tell today was about the time Coach K convinced President Bush to come to a home Duke basketball game. And President Bush went, and then I thought, oh, wait, know your audience. So I'm not going to tell that story.
Yes, Duke is better left unsaid here.
What was I thinking?
Go Hoos.
Anyway, by the way, a big shout out to Marvin Bush, one of President Bush's sons, who big UVA person, big UVA fan, and he would not approve of telling the Duke story. Right?
Yes.
Okay. Why did I write the book? I wrote the book because George Herbert Walker Bush left me too many great stories. It would have been almost criminal not to write the book. And as I started writing, I realized that working for him was so much fun. It was exhausting, but so much fun. And as I said in the book, Mikhail Gorbachev, Mary Kate, once told me to shut up. And I'm oddly proud of that. You're going to have to read the book. But Mikhail Gorbachev told me to shut up. But Tom Selleck once kissed me.
Oh, we like that.
So, what a roller coaster.
I'd rather have it that way than the other way. You don't want to be kissed by Mikhail Gorbachev and Tom Selleck telling you to shut up. So you got the better end of both of those.
I got the better end of that deal. Exactly. Exactly. So I wrote the book, and I wrote it during the pandemic. I started March 1st, 2020, and I hit the send button on Christmas Eve at noon, Christmas Eve. I sent in the last version of it. Is what got me through the pandemic. So thank you, George Bush, for getting me through 2020.
Well, let's jump into some of these great stories that are in this book. I'll start with one that I remember when I first met you. George Bush had just left office. We didn't know each other when we were at the White House. We met after. And when I was at the White House, I would often put humor in his speeches, and he would cross it out. And I remember him saying to me one time, Mary Kate, the American people did not elect me to be a stand-up comic. No, get the jokes out of these things. This is not appropriate. I'm like, okay, sorry. So I just thought he was a pretty serious guy. Well, then we leave office, and I'm writing speeches for him after we leave. And he actually wrote across the top of one of the speeches, more jokes in all caps with exclamation points. So I started sending in jokes for him to pick from, and then I would put them into the speeches. And that's when I first learned about the ranking committee.
Oh,
so
God.
Why don't you explain the ranking committee, and then we'll share a couple of photos. Why don't you explain what the ranking?
For years, President Bush, this was a Bush family thing where President Bush would swear to the grandkids especially, but the kids and grandkids, that there was a highly secretive ranking committee that would decide, could you participate in the tennis tournament? Could you participate in the horseshoe tournament? How did you do at charades on any given night? This ranking committee was constantly ranking them for did they qualify to participate in different activities? So in honor of Mrs. Bush's 75th birthday party, he unveiled for the first time publicly the members of the highly secretive ranking committee.
Yes.
And I believe we have a photo of
Yes.
Is this the time to show the photo?
Yes, let's show who the secret members of the ranking committee are.
While we're looking for that photo,
Yes.
I'll just say that back to your humor, no one had a better sense of humor than George Herbert Walker Bush. And he was such a unbelievable practical joke teller.
Oh, yeah.
there's a story in the book. Oh, there's a
Here we
ranking
go.
committee.
Okay, so there's the ranking committee.
And as you can tell, this picture was taken in President Bush's office in Houston, Texas. And thanks to the magic of Photoshop,
Which he did. Yeah, he figured it out.
he figured it out. And I hate to admit this, but the person in the gold robe, that's actually me. And they superimposed his face onto my face. That's his longtime secretary, Linda Pepsel, sitting next to me. And then the three people behind he kept changing clothes the day we did this. And he did the biker George Bush last, and he stayed dressed like that all day long.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Love being biker George.
So yeah, that's
So
that's how I heard about it, was the ranking committee would rank the jokes that I would send to him.
That's right. They also rank jokes.
Yes, rank jokes. The ranking committee would rank the jokes. And then here's a picture of the president being, remember Johnny Carson did Karnak the Magnificent, who was the soothsayer. Well, the president invented tarmac, as in an airplane, Tarmac the Magnificent. And I first saw it when we were at the White House. He did it at the Gridiron dinner, and Marlon Fitzwater introduced him. And Marlon Fitzwater was basically Ed McMahon. And then the president pulled this turban out from under the table at the Gridiron and started doing his tarmac routine. But then you saw him do this post-presidential. He kept it going. What's this one?
This is, again, it's the same as Mrs. Bush's 75th birthday party, and he was Tarmac the Magnificent. And one, self-deprecating humor.
Oh yeah.
The people we all love and admire the most are the people who can poke fun at themselves. I can't believe I'm bringing this up, but I actually watched Kim Kardashian host Saturday Night Live Saturday night. And it reminded me that President Bush once called me into his office one day, and he was deadly serious. And he said, "Jean, what is a Kardashian? I keep seeing that word, but I don't know what a Kardashian is." But Kim Kardashian poked fun at herself the entire show.
Good for her.
Now, you know what? Made me think differently about her. She just was really self-deprecating. And that was George Herbert Walker Bush.
Absolutely.
Who do you know, a former president, what other former president would put on that ridiculous gold turban and pretend that he was Carmack the Magnificent? But I'm just going to say quickly, Mary Kate, I started to tell the story, and then the picture came up. You're going to have to read the book, but you got the joke. The worst joke he ever played on his wife is when he convinced her that she was being charged with trafficking porn on the internet.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say.
Read the book.
Yes.
Yep. Barbara Bush. So speaking of Barbara,
by the way, she was not trafficking porn.
No, she was not.
I felt like I should say that for the record.
Thank you for correcting that. Yes, unjustly accused, and but as part of an elaborate prank. But she fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, as I recall. Anyway, so speaking of Barbara Bush, I don't see how we can talk about George Bush without talking about the thing he was probably most proud of, which was his family. And we can show a few quick slides, and then we'll take the slides down, and you can tell us a few stories. But let's take a look at some of the family slides here. There you go. There's the extended clan. That's only about 5 years ago, I think.
I'm pretty sure that was taken on Mrs. Bush's 90th birthday. And I think that was the last big family photo that we took. And what a great picture.
Yeah, everybody's in there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see the next one. So this is a famous shot right after George W. Bush spoke on 9/11 at the National Cathedral, right after 9/11, I should say, on the 14th, at National Cathedral. In my speech writing classes, we study that speech, and I always keep it going to the bitter end so the students can see President Bush reaching over to hold his son's hand there for a second.
Do we have time for a quick story while we're on this slide?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do what's up.
Quickly. So protocol calls for when the presidents all get together, funerals, library openings, whatever the event, they sit in the order in which they served. So the question is, what's wrong with this photo? The Clintons should be sitting next to the current president of the United States. It should be George and Laura, the Clintons, then George and Barbara Bush. And it's reversed. President Bush called me on the way to the airport that morning, and he said, I would really love to sit next to my son at the cathedral. Do you think that's possible? I know I'm not supposed to, but he had not seen him since 9/11. They talked on the phone. So I made a phone call to the White House, the great Joe Hagan, who was a deputy chief of staff. And he said, it's really President Clinton's decision. And so they asked President Clinton at the cathedral, would he mind switching places with the president's parents? And he said, of course not. Absolutely. He immediately got it, why it was important to them. So that's what made that photo possible, is that President Bush was able to reach out his hand to him.
It went worldwide at the time. I remember it. Okay, let's see the next one. Okay, so
this is not a family member, but he is a family member. This is Don Rhodes, who worked for the Bushes. He started in President Bush's failed 1964 Senate campaign as a volunteer, and he worked for George and Barbara Bush until Don died. I think he died in 2014, 2015, but he was like a member of the family. And Don Rhodes worshiped the ground that George Bush walked on. But I can tell in this photo, Mary Kate, even Don Rhodes is thinking, really? You're going to wear that?
Yeah, I think that's the last of that series. Oh yeah, they're on their 70th anniversary there. Let me just say one more thing about Don Rhodes while they take that down. So I remember going with you to visit Don Rhodes when he was dying in the hospital. You and I went and sat with him. Don Rhodes was an orphan, basically, and the Bushes took him in as a young man and kept him on their personal payroll for the rest of his life. And he was really a member of that family. And the thing I remember is somebody telling me that if someone came up to me and said, oh, I'm a good friend of the Bush family, that I should say, oh, then you must know Don Rhodes. And if the person said, no, who is Don Rhodes? Then we would know for sure that was not a good friend of the Bush family, because everybody around the Bushes knew and loved Don Rhodes, but he was very much behind the scenes and just a great man. I miss him a lot.
His mother was actually a prostitute, and he had been abused as a child, I think, by his mother's clients. Don was almost completely deaf, and we think we found out that it come from a beating he had taken. Yeah. But he volunteered as a young man, and he was just sort of a lost soul. And the Bushes took this guy under their wing, and he was smart. He was principled. He
was funny. Yeah.
Funny, the most loyal person ever. And, it's just President Bush, working for the Bushes, taught me so much, but they gave this guy a chance and kept him.
There's volumes about both of them.
Yes.
The loyalty between Don Rhodes and the Bushes went up and down, and volumes about all of them. Let me read a quick one from Barbara Perry, my colleague here at the Miller Center. She says, welcome back to the Miller Center, Jean. We remember your visit for the debut of the Bush 41 Presidential Oral History Project, which the Miller Center was proud to produce. Please tell us about the magic behind the amazing longevity and successful political partnership of President and Mrs. Bush's marriage, that last photo we showed on their 70th birthday. Any pearls of wisdom on how they kept their marriage going for so long?
Well, Mrs. Bush used to tell all the grandkids when they got married that the ingredient to a successful marriage was you had to give 55%.
Yep.
I know they tried really hard never to go to bed mad at each other.
Yep.
Theirs was a great untold love story. Actually, their granddaughter Ellie wrote a great book about their love story, and they knew how to agree to disagree. They did not agree on everything. And Mrs. Bush won some, President Bush won some. It was an unbelievable partnership, and they were in love until the day they died. I remember toward the end, Mary Kate, they both were complaining to me separately about how much the other one snored. And I heard this for weeks, and neither one of them were getting any sleep because the snoring. So I finally said to President Bush one day, I said, sir, I think it's time that you two think about sleeping in separate bedrooms. Just, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but she's complaining about your snoring too. And I said, you two have got to get some sleep. It's really important at this stage in your life. I said, I have a lot of friends who've quit they go to separate bedrooms because of the snoring issue. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He says, I need to be able to reach out during the night and hold her hand and know that she's there by my side.
Love that.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
They've
Love
been
that.
married 70 years. And he says, I'd rather listen to her snore all night. I cannot sleep without her.
That's how you do it, you know? Oh my God. Well, Gary Donato sent in a question talking about how difficult a lot of presidents have it with Congress when they're in office. And a lot of times they see their post-presidency as almost like a second chance. And so I'm going to tee up this next section here with his question, which is, what aspects of President Bush 41's personal agenda did he execute in his post-presidency that he wasn't quite as able to do as president? And so I think what comes to my mind, and I hope you would be willing to talk about this, is President Bush's humanitarian side and the amount of work he did on behalf of so many good causes as a post-president that he was not able to do so much when he was in office. And see if you agree with that. And you can tell us some few stories, but maybe we should pull some slides up to show what we're talking about here. But do you agree with me that that would be his agenda after he left office? I
cannot agree with you more. And I love that we keep
there it is. The ranking committee.
This was a good way to sneak in a parachute photo, but there's a reason why Mary Kate put this photo in here.
Yes.
I say in the book, there's a whole chapter called I Have an Idea. It was the 4 scariest words George Bush would ever say to me, because his ideas sometimes were huge.
I have an idea.
And I'll never forget, and this goes back to Barbara Perry's question about the Bush's great partnership. I'll never forget the day he came in, sat down in my office and says, Jean, I have an idea. I'm going to start parachuting out of planes. And my very first question, this was all about, he needed a do-over from World War II. The only time he had parachuted was when he got shot down in World War II. And he wanted to parachute under slightly different circumstances. But when he told me this, the first thing I said to him was, have you told your wife? And he said, no, I haven't. I'm going to do that tonight after I fix her a Manhattan. And then I'm going to break the news to her. And she was famous for saying she didn't like it. He jumped 8 times as a former president. He once jumped on the front yard of their church in Kennebunkport, St. Anne's.
I remember that.
Famous for saying, well, George, this was his 90th birthday. The man's in a wheelchair, but he's going to parachute. And she said, whatever, George. If it goes bad, we're just going to carry you in St. Anne's and have your funeral and be done with it.
That's so funny.
But back to your whole point about his humanitarian causes, this particular jump is actually, I think, on his 75th birthday. This was to raise money for MD Anderson, the great cancer hospital in Houston, Texas. President Bush was chairman of the board of visitors. President Bush used all of his jumps to either raise money for a good cause or to bring attention to a good cause. These parachute jumps got a lot of publicity. And MD Anderson would tell you that he raised hundreds of millions of dollars for them for cancer research. And so he didn't just jump for fun, but it was a great way. If we could see the parachute has MD Anderson written in huge letters on it. But back to the point that you were making, President Bush founded the Points of Light Foundation while he was president. And it was Points of Light is all about encouraging volunteerism, encouraging giving back. He truly believed, this was the quote he used a lot with Points of Light, that any definition of a successful life must include service to others. It's what he was talking about when he talked about a kinder and gentler nation. He truly felt if we would just reach out to each other, be a good neighbor, be a good citizen, that we could solve all of our problems. And so during his post-presidency, he set out to be the best point of light ever imaginable. And there is an entire chapter in the book called Point of Light about all of his work. But there's an entire chapter in the book that I devoted to The Odd Couple. And yes, I think we can go back to some photos. I think The Odd Couple.
Here they are.
Here they are. Barbara Bush is the one. I'm not the one who called them The Odd Couple. Barbara Bush nicknamed them The Odd Couple. This friendship, Mary Kate, is such a great example for all of us. When they became friends, so let me back up. On 2004, Christmas Day, when all of us were eating Christmas dinner, an unbelievable, horrific tsunami hit South Asia. It's still considered one of the worst natural disasters in the history of the world. It just wiped out thousands of lives and destroyed huge parts of Indonesia and Thailand and Sri Lanka. And the 43rd president of the United States, George W. Bush, asked his dad and asked President Clinton if they would consider being partners to raise money in the private sector to help organizations like Doctors Without Borders, AmeriCares, the Red Cross, who were all headed to the region but needed a lot of help to do their job. And the two presidents said yes. And then the president sent them off to the region about 3 months later to represent the United States, to meet with the heads of state, to meet with the victims. Here they are meeting with a group of school children in Indonesia whose school had been destroyed. They were going to school sitting in the dirt. They left on that trip as colleagues with a common purpose, and they came home best friends.
Yeah.
There's no other way of putting it. President Bush, and another reason why I wrote the book, and I sort of figured this out as I was reading it. Oh my gosh, did he ever teach us how to live a life well lived? And Bill Clinton, President Bush was masterful at finding the best in everybody. And in Bill Clinton, he found someone, they both had a servant's heart. They both have servant's hearts. Mm-hmm. And they partnered. If I told you everything they partnered on, all the hurricanes and disasters, we'd run out of time. But again, they raised hundreds of millions of dollars for disaster victims, both here in the United States and around the world.
Let's quickly go through the next two slides. And there's more disaster relief work there. I was trying to figure out if there was some way we could zoom in and get an even better, longer, lingering shot of George Clooney there. But he looks pretty young there. Actually, look how dark his hair is.
Mary Kate just wanted to show this picture because, he's pretty. And just look at those two George Bushes.
Two Georges.
There's a great story in the book about, the funny thing about this story is that this is Hurricane Rita, which came right after Katrina. And President Bush was very quietly helping this little town, Louisiana, named Cameron, Louisiana, raise money to rebuild their hospital, specifically their emergency room. And this is in 2005. And President Bush, he's going to go to Cameron. He's going to give him $2 million. He's going to break ground for the new emergency room. And the governor's coming. The high school marching band is coming. It's going to be an exciting day. And President Bush looks at the schedule and he said, Gene, this is really boring. This is boring. These people have had a horrible year. Their town is gone. Their hospital is gone. We need to give them some excitement. And with attitude, a little bit of attitude, I think I said, well, I think a former president coming to town with $2 million the week before Christmas, I might add, is pretty exciting. Yeah. And he said, no. He says, gee, Bar and I have fallen in love with this TV show. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. We watch it every night. It's called ER. And it stars this great young actor named George Clooney. And we love this show. And so we're rebuilding an emergency room. Why don't we invite George Clooney from ER? And he said, Gene, do you get it? Do you get the connection? And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Well, here's what he didn't get, Mary Kate. ER had not been on TV in years.
He was watching reruns, right?
Watching reruns on TNT. George Clooney is this huge movie star. He's in all those ocean movies. He's People Magazine's sexiest man alive. And I say to President Bush, again with attitude, George Clooney's not coming to Cameron. I said, we don't know him. I said, his politics are way to the left of yours, which of course, this isn't political, but why would George Clooney come to Cameron, Louisiana with George Bush the week before Christmas? I poured buckets of cold water on this idea. And I'm trying to explain to him the concept of reruns. It's like, sir, this show's not on TV anymore. And he looked at me and he goes, well, every night, it's on every night, Gene. There we go. And this is why I loved working for George Bush. Who came to Cameron, Louisiana?
There he is.
There he is. There he is. He just had a way of.
I think this picture is when he first caught a glimpse of you in the crowd. Look at that loving look.
Look at that look. I do love this picture because I would love to know why President Bush is laughing so hard.
Yeah.
What's funny is Cameron, Louisiana is like this little bitty town on the coast of Louisiana. Like 10,000 people showed up that day because word got out who was coming.
Okay, so one more on this series, and then we'll these down. This is at the this is in Houston.
No, at Texas A&M.
Oh, Texas A&M, that's right.
Texas A&M. This is after Hurricane Harvey, and
Right.
This is just a great example of what a powerful force our former presidents can really be in our country. They really. One of the points I wanted to make in the book is they're such great ombudsmen, really, in times of crisis. So Hurricane Harvey dumps 50 inches of rain on Houston. President Bush, this is just a couple of years before he died, and he's very frail. And he says to me, okay, Gene, we got to go to work. And I'm thinking, I think you're past these huge disaster relief missions we've been on in the past, but it's his hometown and he wanted to help. So of course, my first phone call was to George W. Bush's chief of staff. And Freddie said, yeah, I was getting ready to call you. And so the two George Bushes were going to combine to raise money and try to help get Texas past Harvey. And really as a courtesy, just as a courtesy, I emailed my fellow chief of staffs with President Carter, President Obama, and President Clinton, and just said, FYI, the two George Bushes are going to do a Hurricane Harvey relief fund, not asking you to get involved, but just wanted you to know as an FYI. They all joined in. The reaction was immediate. And then President Bush wanted to do this event at College Station, where his library is at Texas A&M. Again, it was a Saturday night in October. I emailed the chief of staffs and I says, we're not expecting your bosses to come. If you happen to be in the neighborhood, we would love to have you. And Larry Gatlin was going to play a few songs in a tent. We were thinking, a nice little event. They all came. Yep. And Lady Gaga came.
Yes, I'm surprised she's not in this photo because she was
I know.
front and center there. Yeah. And
this is me and Therese Birch photobombing the presidents. They're in the green room waiting to be announced. But what I love is they all wanted to be a part of this. And I will tell you one story about Barbara Bush. And so the Bushes and the Bush family, they don't really sometimes realize that their life is a little different from most of ours. But on the other hand, there are times when their lives are exactly like ours.
oh yeah.
I tell the Bushes together, I said, oh my gosh, I have the most unbelievable news for you. Presidents Obama, Clinton, and Carter are all coming to Texas A&M this week to help raise money for Harvey. And Mrs. Bush's reaction, oh, well, I think I better feed him dinner. One
That's
more
so
quick
good.
story, Mary Kate, and I
Yeah.
know we have a lot of ground to cover. President Bush was asked a lot by some of his more conservative friends, why are you friends with President Clinton? And one of his answers was, I'm old and I ran out of things to say 5 years ago. And I don't have to worry about that when I'm with Bill because he does all the talking. If you go back to that, we don't have to go back to the photo, but if you remember the photo we just showed, who was talking in that photo? and all the others are listening to him. But they're just having a good time. We raised the 5 presidents raised $46 million for Hurricane Harvey relief. And I have something, or 46 million.
No.
I have a funny story to tell you, because when George W. became president, we started calling President Bush 41 and him 43 to keep them separate. So all the presidents sort of like to be called by their number. They were all wanting to raise the amount of money as their number.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
But they were very happy. We sailed past 44 with President Obama. So.
I remember being there that night. Barbara Perry and I went together. It was an amazing night. Yeah. And so I want to encourage our listeners and viewers to send in questions. We'd love to hear from you. And we've got a couple more to show you. One more thing that I was going to bring up, and then we can take some more questions, is President Bush hated the word legacy. He would call it the L word. He wouldn't say it out loud. He thought, there's this great story that first time, maybe this is apocryphal, you would know. First time he walked through the Bush Library right before it opened. He got a private tour before they opened the gates to the public. He got on the private tour, and at the end of it, they said, "Well, sir, what did you think of it?" And he said, "Too much about me." Too much about me. Is that what you heard?
Here's the photo where you can see, oh, there it goes, President Clinton doing all the talking.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, he said there were 3 things wrong on the way back to Houston that day. Instead of telling the library folks, there's President Clinton.
There's President Clinton telling the story.
Yeah. He said, it's too much about me.
Yep.
The color they used in the Chinese part when he was the envoy to China,
right?
Wrong color red. And there was a huge collection of ceramic and porcelain and glass elephants in the part of the collection of the art when he was head of the RNC. And he said, yeah, that's just dumb. He says, I don't even like elephants. That's just dumb. But when he said that the library was too much about him, I said, well, it's the George Bush Library. And he wanted, what he wanted was more pictures of General Scowcroft, of James Baker, of his Dan Quayle, his big team. He said, I had the best team in the world. We need more pictures of them.
Well, he did have the dream team, and his humility was a great part in why they all wanted to work for him, because he was so loyal to them, and that engendered their loyalty, I think. But let's talk for a minute about the Bush School and the Bush Library down at Texas A&M. We've got a couple of pictures, and then I'll ask you your opinion on this. But the first picture is the Aggie Wranglers, they're called, and they would perform when we would go down. That's the lobby there at the library in the Bush School. And there's President and Mrs. Bush trying to participate as well, apparently. And
yeah, they try to pretend they're Aggie Wranglers. And again, it just shows how much fun they were.
Oh my God.
That's a ridiculous photo, but I had to put it in the book because, come on.
Yeah, you'd go down for a board meeting, these guys would walk in. It was hilarious. Yeah.
I hate to say this out loud. I don't want to take anything away from the Texas A&M great football team, but I got to tell you, I'm watching the game at home on CBS Saturday night when A&M beat Alabama. And I'm thinking, okay, is that you, President Bush? How the heck did they just beat Alabama? They lost to Arkansas, for God's sakes. But they beat Alabama. I'm telling you, somebody was bleeding Aggie in heaven Saturday night.
That's awesome. Okay, so the next picture is President Bush teaching a class there, or about to teach a class at the Bush School. And so let me ask you this. Why do you think he chose Texas A&M for the library and for the Bush School? What was it about A&M? There were so many other places he could have gone.
He could have. The city of Houston was brokenhearted that they did not get the library museum. It was, first of all, President Bush just really loved the culture of Texas A&M. They have a huge corps of cadets. They have a huge military tradition there. And President Bush just, being a military man and the former commander-in-chief, just had such huge respect for that. And the other part of it, though, was President Bush did not want a foundation. He did not want to establish a new nonprofit. He wanted to establish a school of government and public service. And in part of the, and I was not part of this, this all happened when he was president of the United States. Actually, George W. Bush and Jim Saccone was big in talking to all the different groups interested in hosting the library. And a big part of it was he wanted a George Bush School of Government and Public Service to train future leaders and to encourage our young people to get into the arena, to become a foreign service officer, to become a CIA agent, to run for office, to be mayor of your town, to join a school board. And A&M is the one who gave the right answer. They absolutely were open to this master degree program. And he hated the L word, as you said, but these students are amazing. They really are the future of our country, and they are his legacy. And when he was still here, he would love to drop. Sometimes he would just drop in on a class. Other times he was scheduled to be a guest lecturer. He would, it would be on the agenda. But sometimes he would be up at A&M. He says, well, I'm just going to go walk around the school and pop in on classes. So how lucky were those students? Yeah. I don't even know what they're talking about here, but can you imagine?
Well, the good news is the Bush School just in the last month or so opened a DC campus that we both got a tour of last month. And I have a shameless plug that I'm hoping the Miller Center can work with the Bush School in Washington and do some programming together, because I think the missions align very nicely with presidential studies, public service, things like that. And I think we could do some fun things with them. So Gary, that was a long answer to your question of President Bush's agenda after he left office. And then I think he did a lot of good. Yes, Jean.
Just quickly to get back to Gary's question, he absolutely was right. And that President Bush had both houses of Congress were held by the Democrats. All 4 years President Bush was president. He did manage to get some important legislation passed, including the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA bill, which really is the signature civil rights bill for people with disabilities in this country. It was a game changer for them. I just have to quickly tell you the story. Not long after President Bush had to use a wheelchair because of Parkinson's disease, and he lost use of his legs from the waist down. He's in a wheelchair. We're in downtown Houston. It's a beautiful day. We'd had lunch, and he wanted just to stroll around a little bit and walk around downtown Houston. He's being pushed in his wheelchair. And he looked at me and he says, isn't it wonderful that Houston has all these wheelchair ramps? I've never noticed them before, but it is so easy for us to take this walk, Jean, because I'm just so proud of Houston for putting in all these wheelchair ramps all over downtown Houston. And I looked at him.
And he didn't realize it.
Yeah. No, I said, seriously? I said, sir, you do know that this was part of the ADA law. I said, there are wheelchair ramps like this in every city in America, thanks to you. And ramps going into every public building in America. And he looked at me and he said, oh, I did do that.
Oh my gosh. I remember when he first got the walker, before he was in the wheelchair, he had a walker for a little bit. And he said, Mary Kate, I hate this thing. I can't stand this thing. And I said, sir, you should love it. Your middle name is Walker. And he's like, that's not funny. Anyway.
I think it's funny. I think that's really funny.
Okay, so we have a question from Lisa Trampata. The press seemed to criticize President Bush for being out of touch. They didn't just seem to do that, they did. Why do you think the press failed to see his more humorous side that you guys are describing? What do you think was the disconnect?
Well, shout out to Lisa. Nice to hear from you, Lisa. My answer may surprise everybody, including you, Mary Kate. You know who I blame? Him.
Really?
I do. And that World War II generation, the difference between the World War II generation and every generation since social media came into being, And I'm not being critical of social, well, sort of, I am kind of, and people. And so, right now we live in a world where everybody thinks that everybody wants to know what you had for breakfast and what you're thinking about every little thing, and they post it on social media. The World War II generation was too far the other way, almost. Yeah. Senator Dole was famous for talking about him in the third person. And President Bush, they came home from the war and they didn't talk about the war.
Nope.
They didn't talk about what they went through. I remember my dad, who never saw combat, but he was in charge of the motor pool at the Nuremberg trials. And we found that he met all those criminals. We found this out when we were all, it's a long story. I don't want to start talking about my dad, but that was how they were trained not to talk about themselves. And of course, I wasn't around in 1980, 88, 92. Well, in 92 I was, but in the East Wing. But I have read that his campaign staff was very frustrated with him because they wanted him to talk about being shot down, losing 3-year-old Robin to leukemia. They wanted him to just open up about his life experience and about some of the rough and tumble. The media was portraying him as this elitist from New England. And he didn't believe in talking about himself. He believed in talking about the issues. And now we've gone too far the other way. Yeah. So he didn't show, he did a little bit, but he failed to show that very personal human side of himself. You remember President Clinton in 1992? One of his most famous lines was, "I feel your pain." Mm-hmm. Oh my God, George Bush would never say something like that. But it really struck a chord with the American people. But President Bush would consider that too
much about him, because it starts with I. Like, he would cross out I.
Yes.
If speeches had too many I's in them, they'd come back circled. Too many I's. In a democracy, we use we. He didn't want to talk about him.
As Mary Kate knows, I was Mrs. Bush's post-White House speechwriter, and she would circle all the I's. And I'm like, but Mrs. Bush, people want to know what you think. No, they don't. Well, so I blame him. It's a great question, Lisa.
Yes. Let me tell you one more quick vignette, and then we've got a couple more questions. One is, I remember the president started these horseshoe tournaments at the White House that the press and the public did not know about. He loved to play horseshoes. He put a horseshoe pit in at the White House, and they would form teams. And so it would be like the ushers against the landscape guys, against the political guys, against the, florist office, whatever. And the historian, David McCullough, was visiting, and he saw President Bush and Marvin, whose, horseshoe sports names were Mr. Smooth and Smooth Jr. And so Mr. Smooth and Smooth Jr. were competing against the ushers. There was a lot of trash talk going on by the ushers, telling Marvin, "You're going down, you're going to lose," all this kind of stuff going on. Absolutely hilarious. And David McCullough said to me later, if the American people could have seen that, I think he would have been reelected in a landslide.
Yes.
But that was the kind of thing he would be uncomfortable showing that aspect because he thought that was, not presidential or whatever. And the world has changed. You would see that now. And I think people would see that about him now too. Okay, so the next question is from Laura Hune. How do you think President Bush would have reacted to the Trump administration? And you and I were talking last night about your conversation with him about how polarized the country has become and what he was saying about his experiences with that in the past. Could you share that? Because I thought that was a really interesting.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to answer your first question because one of the decisions I made when I wrote the book is President Bush died November 2018. And a lot of people have asked me on the book tour about what I think he would say about today. And I don't want to put words in his mouth. That's not fair to him. So I'm not going to do that.
That's fine.
But having said that, when before he died, a lot of people would talk to him about their concern about the country and would call it the worst of times. And his answer was always the same. He said, just in my lifetime, this is what this country has been through. He talked about the Great Depression. He talked about World War II and all the people who were killed, starting with 6 million Jews in the Holocaust and all the soldiers. And World War II was devastating to the world. He talked a lot about the 60s. He really would dwell, his answer would really dwell on the 60s, which really struck a chord with me because the 60s, I was in the second grade when JFK was killed. And he would just say to whoever he was talking to, he would say, in the 60s, you have to remember that we had 3 major assassinations. Our cities were almost burning down between civil rights riots, Vietnam War protests. Vietnam was tearing this country apart. And we were coming to grips with our past and with civil rights. And it was the 60s were chaotic. And President Bush says, and then we started to go from the 60s into Watergate. And Watergate was devastating to this country. Our president had to resign, which had never happened, step down from office because of what he did in office. And President Bush's answer was always the same. We got past that. And then, of course, he would talk about 9/11. And he said, if we can get past the 60s, if we can get past Watergate, World War II, he would talk about, the world, we got this, we can do this. We know how we can make our country better and stronger. And what amused me, Mary Kate, if whoever he was talking to did not buy it, if they're like, well, these times are different, his answer was always the same. I didn't even bring up the Civil War. He says, I didn't bring up the Civil War because I wasn't alive then. But he says, if we can survive the Civil War, we will survive this. And I think that's what he would say about today.
I think that's what he would say too.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, here's a question from Chuck Bruce. President Bush had a wonderful habit of sending handwritten notes to a wide variety of people. How much do you think this contributed to his relationships with Congress, other important figures? And did he continue writing notes in his post-presidency? You are the expert on this because you wrote a book with him.
President Bush refused to do his autobiography. He just had no interest in doing an autobiography. He and Brent Scowcroft, his national security advisor, did do a book called The World Transformed on their foreign policy. But the autobiography, you know what he said about writing an autobiography? I know the ending.
Oh, I know the ending.
I know the ending. It'd be so boring. I'm like, oh, good grief. So we knew that he was a great letter writer. So we had the idea of doing a coffee table book where we would maybe publish 20 letters with photos, just a nice fancy coffee table book. And I started doing research at his presidential library to identify the letters to put in this book. And I called our editor, the great Lisa Drew with Simon & Schuster. And I said, Lisa, this man has been a serial letter writer since he was 18 years old. I said, we can do his autobiography through letters he has written. And she said, are you kidding me? And I'm like, no, we can tell it's starting with World War II. We can tell his whole life story. The man was a great writer. He was a great letter writer. He was famous for doing thank you notes. He used to write thank you notes for thank you notes, which quite frankly drove the staff crazy. But he did continue post-presidency. He had an amazing letter exchange with the great Time magazine presidential historian Hugh Sidey. Those letters are still under lock and key. It's an amazing correspondence between the two of them for 10 years. But he also was a classic writer of emails. And if you read the book, The Man I Knew, I do include some of his essays and memos. And one of the funniest memos in the book is a memo he wrote to the staff and volunteers in the office that there were too many coffee cups in the office. And he was beginning to have nightmares about coffee cups falling out of the cabinets in the kitchen. He was a great writer, and it's sort of a lost art, which is too bad.
I have to agree with you on that. I think he would probably agree with me. He would much rather write a note or write anything than give a speech. And
Right.
he was a very, very good writer, and that gets overlooked. So I'm glad you wrote all the best and compiled it all together. I have a binder, this thick of all the notes he wrote me over the years. Someday I'll give them to the Bush Library, but it's one of the joys of my life that the notes I got from him, and I would write back, and it was a great part of our friendship. I have framed in my house 2 letters when my 2 daughters were born. The one to my daughter Gracie starts with it's on George Bush letterhead. Dear Gracie, I haven't met you yet, but I love you already. And that kind of thing. The number of people that I came across, especially during his funeral, who would pull out these letters from him all over the country. There's got to be thousands and thousands of Americans with letters from George Bush. And
it was hard to decide what to put in the book, because letters just came out of the woodwork. And after the book was published, I heard from a lot of other people who said, why is it my letter in this book? And I wanted to say, because I've never heard of you. But anyway.
One of the times I came back, I had given a presentation on his life and times at Episcopal High School in Alexandria. And it was the entire student body, and the teachers basically locked the doors at the end of the presentation and said, nobody is leaving this room until you write a note to someone who is important in your life, just like George Bush did, telling them how much you appreciate them.
Oh my God.
And they mailed them out on behalf of the students. And I came back and I told President Bush that I gave this presentation, and this is what the high school did. And he was like, I love it. And everybody should do that. Every time somebody has a slideshow or something, make them write notes. I think that's great. And it's a lost art. And I think we need more of it in this country.
Lost art. And one of the reviews of all the best, I love this. One reviewer said, the beauty of writing his autobiography through the letters he wrote is there was no revisionism.
Yeah.
This is truly what he thought.
No voice of the editor. Yeah.
And the letters are so amazing that another reviewer for a little bitty home paper in Maine, I'm not going to talk about it. One reviewer wrote, there's no way these letters are true. These letters were written for this book. Because
come on.
Did I call him and give him a piece of my mind? Yes, I did.
Good.
But that's how amazing his letters are. And the fact that the letter he wrote his kids during Watergate about how disillusioned he became, the letter he wrote his mom the day after he was shot down, the letter he wrote his mother when Robin died. They're absolutely amazing.
Well, we are out of time, but we had some great questions from our audience and great stories from you. And what an amazing life he led. We can all learn from him. And what a wonderful career you've had, and what a great service you've done to our country by sharing all this through this book. And thank you for coming here today. And thank you for writing such a spectacular book. I really
thank you, Mary Kate. Only a best friend would say that, but what a great honor it was to go and work for that man. And I was hoping we'd run out of questions so I could tell the story of why Gorbachev told me to shut up. But I guess you all are going to have to read the book.
You got to read the book.
Buy the book. It's in the book.
Good.
So much fun. I love being here at the great University of Virginia. I'm feeling really sad I brought up Duke. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go Who's. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Great, guys. You can take it easy. We're done.
Thanks.